And we are in line 64. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. And so you can see the progression of God's just like literally taking the hedge of protection away. God has not been there to fight their battles. He just leaving them to their own self. And if their maidens are not given to marriage, then how can they populate? How can they become fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth if they're not being given in marriage? Now, this day and age, they don't care if they're married or not. So, God is not getting glory out of that either. Now, let's go into line 64 again with the reference scriptures for the priests. So it says their priests fell by the sword, and that sends us to 1 Samuel 4:17. That says, so the messenger answered and said, Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has been a great slaughter among the people. Also your two sons Hophni and Phinehas are dead, and the ark of God has been captured. So you can see how the priests fell by the sword. God's protection had left them. And then also it sends us to 22:18, and we read this one before. 22:18, that says, and the king said to Doeg, you turn. And this is Saul, when he told Saul to kill Doeg. When Saul told Doeg to kill the priest. And here it is again in 22:18, 1 Samuel 22:18. And the king said to Doeg, you turn and kill the priest. So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck the priest, and killed on that day 85 men who wore a linen ephod. So he attacked them. And so going back to Psalm 78, it says, and their widows made no lamentation. And that sends us to Job 27:15. That says, those who survive him shall be buried in death, and their widows shall not weep. So let's go back and start at 13, just so we can read it in context and see why Job said this. This is a portion of a wicked man with God, and the heritage of oppressors received from the Almighty. If his children are multiplied, it is for the sword, and his offspring shall not be satisfied with bread. Those who survive him shall be buried in death, and their widows shall not weep. So so the widows, or literally his widows, will not even weep when the husbands are killed. So let's move into the next stanza. It's a 2-line stanza. 65. Then the Lord awoke as one out of sleep, and like a mighty man who shouts because of wine. And he beat his enemies back. He put them to a perpetual reproach. And so now here it is. We when we started this, remember the theme of this is God's continued guidance in spite of unbelief. And so, Asaph went through thoroughly, showing all the, marvelous acts of God that he did, and then how Israel just, turned their backs on God. And then now it's like, remember, he used the same imagery, God waking up out of a sleep, as he did in Psalm 63:20 when we first started the book. When he said in Psalm 73:20, as a dream when one awakes, so Lord, when you awake, you should despise your image. But remember that God is not sleeping. He never sleeps nor slumbers. And so, but it was like that because being that all these things had begun to happen to Israel, it was like God was sleeping. He wasn't paying attention or anything like that. And so now the imagery here is that then the Lord awoke as of one out of a sleep, and like a mighty man who shouts because of wine, and so, and that sends us to Isaiah 42:13. Isaiah 42:13. That says, the Lord shall go forth like a mighty man. He shall stir up his zeal like a man of war. He shall cry out, yes, shout aloud. He shall prevail against his enemies. So now it's like, okay, God is up. Now this is what he's going to do. He's not just going to lay down and let the enemy just take over his people, or the people who he called by his name. And so let's pause here and we'll pick it up in the next segment.